and welcome to this virtual program on the effectiveness of United Nations peacekeeping, Gender Matters. I'm Melanne Verveer, the director of the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace, and Security. Today, we are launching new research, Gendered Impacts on Operational Effectiveness of UN Peace Operations. The report is in partnership with Global Affairs Canada's ELSI initiative for Women in Peace Operations. Across various peacekeeping missions, we see that women's participation improves community engagement, builds local trust, and changes the narrative of women's roles in society. Women do, in fact, make peace operations more effective. And the United Nations has been committed to deploying more women. The UN Security Council Resolution 1325 urges the UN Secretary General to seek to expand the role and contributions of women in field-based operations, especially military observers and civilian police. And yet, despite policies and programs designed to increase women's participation in peacekeeping, women remain significantly underrepresented. As of January of this year, women comprised fewer than 5% of all military personnel. 11% of personnel in formed police units, and 28% of individual police officers on peacekeeping missions. Why is this the case? How can it be improved for greater operational effectiveness of peacekeeping operations? The report that we are launching today provides recommendations on how gender mainstreaming and the integration of local perspectives can improve operational effectiveness. It also provides insights on better data collection, policies, and practices, and tells us why this is so important. The report, as well as the accompanying case studies, can be found in the link in your chat box. Today, we will hear from distinguished experts and peacekeepers from across 3 UN peacekeeping operations, those in Lebanon, Cyprus, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. You will get their perspectives on the difference women in uniform make and how they are working to ensure a gender lens in peace operations. We are happy to welcome more than 500 attendees who are joining us on Zoom from across 90 countries and many time zones, and many others who will be joining us on Facebook. A special welcome to each and every one of you. As a reminder, we have already received many pre-submitted questions from our audience members. You will also have the opportunity to submit questions during the discussion. Just use your Q&A feature on your screen. Tell us your name, affiliation, and to whom you are directing your question. And hopefully we'll have some time at the end of our discussion with our experts today to take those questions. It is now my special honor to introduce His Excellency Jean-Pierre Lacroix, the UN Under-Secretary General for Peace Operations. A French diplomat, he has over 25 years of political and diplomatic experience, much of it focusing on multilateral organizations and UN programs. He's also served in many diplomatic posts, including Ambassador of France to Sweden and the French Deputy Perm Rep to their mission at the UN. He has been a longtime advocate for the role of women in peace and security. We are grateful to him for his commitment and leadership, and I want to express our personal thanks to him for the UN personnel in the field and in New York for their participation in this project. Under Secretary General Lacroix, thank you so much for being with us today. We look forward to your remarks.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Verveer, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all. I want to begin by thanking you and thanking the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace and Security and Global Affairs Canada, ELSI initiative for Women in Peace Operation for hosting this very important virtual event. And it's a pleasure for me to take part in this discussion with so many friends, colleagues, distinguished panelists, all of them working day in, day out to advance the women, peace and security agenda, and particularly in the context of peacekeeping. I want to recognize the report that is launched today. I believe it's a very important contribution to our joint efforts to increase the full, equal, meaningful participation of women in peacekeeping, and also to advance gender responsive peacekeeping. And I note that I could say, I mean, I haven't personally found any difference or any disagreement with the conclusion and recommendation of the report. So it's a great contribution, and congratulations to those who contributed to it. Now, let me just repeat that the objective of increasing the participation of uniformed women in peacekeeping is and remains an absolute key priority for us. We know, as you were reminding us, Ambassador, as the report says, that women's participation in peacekeeping improves. Well, I used to say women participation in peacekeeping makes peacekeeping more effective, but in particular, as the report says, it does improve community engagement and changes the overall narrative of women's role in society. So indeed, it goes beyond a more effective peacekeeping, and it has a whole number of ramifications, all of them very important. Since 2018 and through the implementation of the Uniform Gender Parity Strategy, we have made significant progress in increasing the representation of women among all uniformed personnel. We had set targets for ourselves in the strategy, and we met, actually, we surpassed all of them except for military contingent. Form contingent in the military is an environment where the proportion of women remains very low. It's a question of resources. I think it's gradually increasing. The proportion of women in our uniform military contingent actually increases steadily over each year, but this is where we have a deficit and a harder time to achieve our goals. On the other hand, as you mentioned several figures, the increase in women staff officers and military experts on mission from 12 to 18%, women individual police officers, again from 2018 all the way to 2020, from 22 to 30%, almost a third, women in formed police units from 9% to 18%. So it is improving, and so is the number of women at the senior uniform level. We have just appointed, actually the announcement was made yesterday, the first ever woman deputy military advisor to Secretary General, Major General Maureen O'Brien from Ireland. There are currently 3 women serving in the field in the most senior military positions, either as a force commander or deputy force commander, and we have 2 women serving as heads of police components and 3 more taking up the same positions soon, which will, I believe, take us to 50%, and probably more than 50% heads of police component women. So this is indeed a very high number. It's a record number of women serving in such senior uniform positions in our organization. And at the same time, and you also reminded us that there is much more to do, and not only numbers, but beyond numbers. We know that the contribution of women to peacekeeping cannot be driven by numbers alone. We also need to transform the work environment to make sure that women will also be able to contribute fully their skills, their experiences, their perspectives to the fullest. We have taken a number of measures in that direction. I will name a few: supporting women's networks at mission level, contributing to an ELSI-funded project by the Department of Operational Support to develop camp designs that meet the different safety and well-being needs of women and men peacekeepers. We believe it's very important to work on the physical environment, the facilities, and also gathering data through internal consultation and the ongoing development of a survey for uniformed personnel, again with Canada's generous support, to help determine further actions. We must keep working in close partnership with our troop and police contributing countries, whom I believe are much more aware and supportive of this agenda, but we must keep working with them and with all partners to help break down the barriers uniformed women are still facing. And at the same time, I believe it's important to emphasize that we should not place the burden of changing the culture of peacekeeping and improving operational effectiveness solely on women. It is, and it should be recognized as, everybody's responsibility. And this is why our strategic and operational plans, which are derived from the Secretary General's Action for a Peacekeeping Initiative, ensure systematic integration of gender analysis and women, peace and security priorities in planning, implementation, and reporting processes across missions. A4P+, which is the, let's say, the updated version of A4P after 3 years of implementation of this initiative, or rather the various work strands covered by this initiative. A4P+ further strengthens WPS as a cross-cutting imperative, highlighting that its transformative impact on the UN peacekeeping agenda must be fully seized in all areas. In other words, we have listed a few key areas on which we need to put an emphasis as we move towards further steps in implementing A4P. And at the same time, we have determined that WPS, the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, should be mainstream in all these priorities. Examining how gender shapes and is shaped by conflicts does help uncover opportunities to prevent a return to conflict and strengthen gains on gender equality. Identifying gender conflict triggers and peace enablers is also a critical aspect of our mission planning processes. And in this regard, we, DPO, in partnership with our good friends from UN Women, we have developed a methodology on gender-responsive conflict analysis to ensure a standard approach across peacekeeping missions. A few examples: in Darfur, Sudan, the systematic integration of gender-responsive conflict analysis into the transition planning has helped us to identify gains made on WPS and priorities for the follow-up mission, the follow-up UN mission, UNITAMS, for that mission to build on. In Mali and the DR Congo, gender-responsive conflict analysis have been factored in the mission's transition calendars, and they're currently being undertaken to inform the transition planning process. We've also ensured that gender analysis informs the department's decision-making and strategic planning processes to help enhance accountability across peacekeeping missions. We do believe there is scope to coordinate gender-responsive analysis with initiatives in order to increase women's full, equal, and meaningful participation. An example of this is the mixed engagement platoons, a new military capability which focuses on engaging with the local communities to serve them better. I've met with the members of these engagement platoons in southern Lebanon. We also have the same kind of units in DR Congo, and we believe that it really does help us in better engaging with communities, better building trust, and as a result of that, being more effective, particularly in civilian protection of civilians. Gender responsive analysis is fundamental for this work, and at the same time, the kind of new capability contributes to increasing the number of women deployed at the tactical level, which is also important because by definition, mixed engagement platoons require at least a deployment of 50% women. So it's really a tactical field, a very concrete experience for our women in uniform. So let me just conclude by welcoming those hard-won gains on the strategic priority, and this is really a collective work. And I do want to thank you for your support and your active contribution to helping us achieve these objectives. And at the same time, equally important, as you reminded us, Ambassador, acknowledging the challenges ahead and keep the good work on addressing these challenges. So I thank you. I call upon all of us to continue working closely together as we will be seeking further progress. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Undersecretary General Lacroix, for not only giving us a timely update on a recent appointment of the Deputy Military Advisor to the Secretary General, but for your comprehensive overview of what is being done and what needs to continue to be done. As you said, numbers are important, but it's really transforming the workspace, the work environment. And your mention, I think, of the troop contributing countries and the changes that are in process need to continue, that being another important element that we're all aware of. And then, of course, for your very cogent remarks about the gender responsive conflict analysis and how it works, how it is working, and how it needs to continue to work. So we're very grateful to you for your leadership. You can consider all of us involved here to continuing to partner with you, because as you so rightly said, this is everyone's responsibility. So thank you so much. I'm now pleased to welcome the Director General for the Peace and Stabilization Operations Program of Global Affairs Canada, Gwen Coutts. She is a career diplomat in Canada's Foreign Service, having served as ambassador to Peru and Bolivia, to Argentina and Paraguay, and was also Canada's first resident ambassador to El Salvador. She has served in many other diplomatic posts, as well as at headquarters in Canada, and she's worked on a range of issues from energy and environment to human rights, and of course to security and peacekeeping. Director General Coutts, thank you so much for being with us today. And let me add that we are grateful to you and your colleagues for the partnership that we've had with Canada's ELSI initiative. We look forward to hearing from you.
Well, thank you so much, and welcome everybody to this important event. I'd like off the top to thank Ambassador Verveer and her team at the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace and Security for convening us all here today. And Canada is very proud to be working in partnership with you in order to support that necessary research on women's participation in peacekeeping as part of the overall ELSI initiative for women in peace operations. I'd also like to thank Undersecretary General Lacroix for his wonderful numbering of the many advances in both cultural and institutional change that we're seeing starting to grab, to get traction and momentum, both at the UN headquarters and of course where the rubber hits the road in the field. I'm very grateful as well for the distinguished panelists who are joining us here today for generously sharing their time and their research and their commitment to gender responsive peacekeeping. For peace operations to be effective, they must be gender responsive. Across the diverse tasks with which the UN missions are mandated, from protection of civilians to security sector reform to ceasefire monitoring and others, it's essential that missions both understand and respond to the different needs and challenges faced by women and men in the environments in which they operate. And that's another reason why we're so pleased to see the work that's going on with the UN in terms of gender responsive analysis and conflict analysis. This belief is reflected as well in Canada's own second National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security, in which we've committed to strengthening the ability of peace operations to advance the WPS agenda. It's also reflected in our actions, whether in advocacy in forums such as the UN's Special Committee on Peacekeeping Operations, or our financial support for gender advisors in MINUSMA and MINUSCA, or in our work to help develop the training curricula for the engagement platoons, which are mandated in the most recent UN Infantry Battalion Manual. Canada is striving to ensure that our commitments translate into concrete results. This, of course, also extends to our work in promoting the meaningful participation of uniformed women in UN peace operations through the ELSI initiative. For missions to deliver on their mandates in a gender-responsive manner, they must reflect the diversity of the populations they serve and embody the values of gender equality that they seek to promote in support of sustainable peace. As evidence has shown in so many contexts, greater gender diversity in missions can help improve the situational awareness of missions, enhance capacity to engage with local populations, including women, and help promote gender equality in the societies in which the missions operate. At the same time, we must underscore that uniformed women are needed in these missions because they're qualified and capable, and it is their right to participate on an equal footing. Increasing uniformed women's meaningful participation can help ensure that the missions have the diverse skills, perspectives, and experiences which are needed to address the challenges which face contemporary peace operations. But as Dr. Nagel's report shows, to ensure women peacekeepers can do the jobs for which they're qualified, we need to ensure that the barriers to their full, effective, and meaningful participation are eliminated. Through the ELSI initiative, Canada is working with the UN and with member states from across the globe to tackle this challenge, including by launching bilateral partnerships with Ghana, Zambia, and Senegal to identify and address barriers to uniformed women's meaningful participation in UN peace operations within these countries' institutions, working with the UN, of course, to launch the multi-partner ELSI Initiative Fund, which has just commenced its second programming round. We're so pleased to see that. And Canada also contributed $13 million to support its work. We're also supporting the UN to create those receptive environments for uniformed women in peacekeeping operations, including the development of the new gender responsive guidelines for camp accommodations, and of course, funding the cutting edge research, including the report which is being launched here today. This is just some of the work that Canada, together with its partners, is doing to advance gender parity and gender responsive peace operations. But we all know that we need to do more collectively in order to obtain our objectives. So with this in mind, I'd like to conclude my remarks with a few calls for action to all of those joining us here today. First, let us remember the importance of listening to the voices of the peacekeepers and local civil society on how to make missions more effective and gender responsive. It's critical that we take up this report's recommendation to meaningfully engage with these groups, including diverse groups of women, peace builders, and human rights defenders, in order to inform mission strategies, activities, and performance indicators. Second, we need to make sure that the commitment to gender responsive peacekeeping is reinforced in UN policy and procedures, and that adequate funding is provided to UN missions in order to deliver on this commitment. Finally, effective missions need the meaningful participation of all personnel, men and women. So we call on all partners to join with Canada in working to identify and to address the barriers to uniformed women's meaningful participation in UN peace operations, both in military and police institutions, and within the UN missions themselves. Whether by conducting barrier assessments, applying to or providing financial support to the ELSI Initiative Fund, or advocating for the implementation of the UN's Uniformed Gender Parity Strategy, the UN, member states, and civil society can work together to concretely promote gender equality in peace operations. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Director General Coutts. Thank you for the call to action, which is for all of us to heed, and for your fundamental point that mission effectiveness and gender responsiveness go hand in hand. So thank you, and thank you to the ELSI Initiative for all the good work that has been accomplished to date, but for so much more that's continuing going forward. I'm going to turn now to my colleague to get an overview of the report, some of the key highlights on the findings and recommendations. The author of the report, Dr. Robert Nagel, is a postdoctoral fellow at our Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace, and Security. He is a respected authority on conflict resolution, post-conflict stability, and conflict-related sexual violence, and has won several awards for his work. He's been intensively engaged over the last many, many months, along with his research assistants on this report. So Rob, we're turning to you now to give us an overview.
Thank you so much. Let me share my screen because I have a couple of slides here. Let me first start by thanking everyone for joining us today. Thank you to the distinguished panelists and everyone around the world for joining us, whatever time zone you're in. I'm excited to be here to share this important research with you. Let me start by again thanking Global Affairs Canada's ELSI Initiative for women's participation in military operations, for their generous support for this research project. Thank you to all of the UN members, both in New York and in the field, for their participation. I would also like to highlight and credit Kate and Julia, my research assistants and co-authors on this research. They've done tremendous work on this, so I would like to highlight them. We were interested in particular in the question of what are the gendered impacts of men and women in uniform on operational effectiveness. By gendered impacts, we mean the effects associated with men and women, including traits, behaviors, and practices perceived as masculine and feminine or related to other socially constructed ideas about the sexes. And to explore these questions in relation to operational effectiveness of peacekeeping missions, we conducted research on 3 missions in the DRC, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, MONUSCO, UNFICYP in Cyprus, and UNIFIL in Lebanon. And we reviewed personnel data, strategy, policy, and standard operating procedure documents from all 3 missions, including UNDPO material, such as the gender parity strategy documents and gender responsive strategy documents from headquarters. In addition, we conducted 78 interviews with mission personnel and civil society representatives from the different countries. And what we find is that, as mentioned, women in uniform have a positive impact specifically on community engagement and transforming the role of women in society. And that was really highlighted from both men and women in uniform, civil society actors, local representatives. And so that kind of suggests and supports the claim that UNDPO often makes, that more women leads to more effective peacekeeping. But as Undersecretary Lacroix mentioned, that can be a problematic framing because it places an extraordinary burden on women. In addition to that, we found that it actually also creates some resentment among uniformed men. And so it can create tension within the mission, and we don't want that, right? Because that creates the sort of work environment that makes it more difficult for women in uniform to excel. In addition, we also find that there continues to be a lack of gender disaggregated data and a lack of beneficiary input on assessing peacekeeping effectiveness. There are no systematic channels in place that allow regular, consistent, reliable input from those affected, those who are served and protected by peacekeepers. Based on our research, we suggest reframing the debate about effectiveness. Here you see a graph of some of the numbers that we've discussed and the progress that has been made over the last 15 years. And you see the blue line is the share of women in military contingents, and the red line is uniformed women in police as part of peacekeeping operations. And I highlight this because the current framing continues to place a burden on a small minority of women in uniform. And it also limits their opportunities as it currently exists. So we suggest, based on the research we've conducted, that the emphasis should not be on women make peacekeeping more effective, but diversity, equal opportunity, and the right people with the right skills, that makes for more effective peacekeeping. And that obviously includes a gender diversity, but it includes more. It includes equal opportunities for women that are deployed. So that means having them do everything that men do rather than keeping them on base, for example. So in addition, in parallel to the decade-long push towards more gender-responsive peacekeeping, there's also been a push towards more data-driven peacekeeping. And in particular, there are two initiatives that I want to highlight that stood out to us in our research. And that is, on the one hand, the Situational Awareness Geospatial Enterprise, or SAGE, which is used to record violent events and peacekeeping activities, and presents a big step forward in making peacekeeping more effective and more efficient. The other system I want to highlight is the Comprehensive Planning and Performance Assessment System, or CPAS, which is used to assess mission outputs and outcomes against the desired impacts. These are two very important initiatives, and I really want to emphasize that I'm a big fan of both. And so I want to see them work even better. And the way we, I think, can improve them is by making sure their implementation across missions becomes more uniform. Obviously, it has to be tailored in terms of the individual mission context. So, for example, violent events are different from mission to mission, and so SAGE cannot be uniform. But what can be uniform is the recording of peacekeeper activities and recording who does what. And I'll go into more detail for that in a second, because we identified 4 potential areas of improvement. And that is, 1, a greater need for gender disaggregated data, a greater need for gendered organizational analysis when it comes to peacekeeping missions, and the need for systematic community input and data sharing within mission. So the different compartments, getting a little bit into the weeds here, but there are different parts in the mission, including the Joint Operations Center or the Joint Military Analysis Center, JMAC. They get all the information, but not all the information goes to battalion commanders, contingent commanders, sector commanders. And so there's a greater need for data sharing when it comes to situational awareness. And we want to really emphasize that you can't improve what you don't measure. So, for example, in the DRC, SAGE does not include information on how many patrols include mixed engagement teams, how many patrols do include women. And the reason why that's important is because we don't know the information differences between mixed patrols and men-only patrols, But we know from testimony from local civil society representatives and people on the ground that local women are more likely to share information when women in uniform are part of the patrols, when they have a woman they can confide in, about whether it's about sexual and gender-based violence or other threats, right? And so if we want to improve peacekeeping and enhance situational awareness, we also need to start collecting information on that and see really where can we make progress. The other part is that because men represent the overwhelming majority of peacekeepers, we also need to start analyzing what they do and how their masculinity and their posture and their behavior towards local beneficiaries might negatively impact peacekeeping operation effectiveness. Meaning, for example, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, we heard testimony from interviewees that male peacekeepers would look down on local beneficiaries and at times treat them disrespectfully. One incident in particular that was mentioned was that a local beneficiary's car was violently pushed out of the way using an armored vehicle by peacekeepers. And that sort of stereotypically militarized masculinity that comes through in that behavior also needs to be analyzed, right? So how do men negatively or positively affect peacekeeping, not just focusing on the small minority of women? And so we have 5 concrete recommendations. One, the collection of more gender disaggregated data specifically on peacekeeper activities. 2, a more systematic analysis of the qualitative gender data that is already available. So from reports from patrols that can be analyzed, that can be investigated in terms of the gendered behaviors and gendered patterns of men and women in missions. 3rd, the comprehensive gender organizational analysis, meaning in what positions are women, what do they get to do, and how can we improve that? One of the really memorable interview quotes was from a member in MONUSCO that said, basically, men do the important work and women do their work. And so thinking about how that sort of division, the gender division of labor within the mission affects what men and women can do, and how that might negatively impact the operational effectiveness is really important. And then establish mechanisms for the regular and systematic community input. The local beneficiaries need to have a say in assessing and evaluating the mission effectiveness. And that needs to be really on a regular basis. And then lastly, the internal access to data and sharing and reporting. So making sure contingent commanders, battalion commanders, sector commanders have all the information that they need, that there is the flow of information from SAGE officers and the military analysis of information and intelligence to the ones going out on patrol, really enhancing the situational awareness. And I will conclude here. Thank you so much again to our distinguished panel. I really appreciate your time and everyone joining us today. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Rob, for that overview of the report, the recommendations, the findings. We're now going to take this to the ground and hear from those who are actually involved in these peacekeeping missions. I'm going to start with Major General Cheryl Pierce, who most recently served as the force commander for the UN forces in Cyprus. She commanded over 800 peacekeepers representing 15 nations. And I might add, it was the first time that the UN force in Cyprus had been led by an all-female leadership team. Earlier, General Pierce was a senior officer in the Australian Army, commanded the Defense Policy Training Center, later commanded the 1st Military Police Battalion, and in 2016, she was also commander of the task force group in Afghanistan. She's had many other appointments with the Australian Army and even worked with UN operations in East Timor. So we're very grateful to General Pierce for joining us.
Ambassador, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in the launch of an important new report, Gendered Impacts on Operational Effectiveness of UN Operations, and to discuss the differences women in uniform make and how to incorporate a gender lens in data collection and analysis, as well as share recommendations for advancing gender response peacekeeping. As the former force commander for the UN mission in Cyprus, I'd like to offer comments on what difference a gender perspective makes in peace operations, how changing the narrative about females' peacekeeping roles in Cyprus normalised their participation across all sectors of the mission, the opposing forces and the community more broadly. I'd also offer my thoughts on the barriers to women's meaningful participation across operations and a couple of recommendations for integrating gender throughout mission structures and operations, as well as advancing more women in leadership positions. Firstly, a gender perspective is imperative in effective peace operations, as without understanding the operational impact with a gendered view of the communities we support and our own force, peace operations cannot be planned and executed to adequately support the total population. In the absence of deliberate gender analysis of operational effectiveness, which I assess will be essential for commanders and leaders to best understand the operational requirements and force posture, gender diversity within the force at all levels and across all roles is essential to enable a commander to change the narrative. I provide this comment as I lead with an inclusive and diverse mindset. It is not a soft approach to operations, but an approach where all voices, both male and female, are represented and respected. If this occurs, then a gendered perspective inherently occurs and often is the best operational plan and outcomes is developed. With this lens, I was able to work with my sector commanders via written strategy and direct engagement to ensure a gendered perspective remained a priority where often cultural norms would override my intent. If I saw deviations to this approach, I would adjust to a more prescriptive plan with my commander to ensure mixed gendered patrols and engagement teams occurred and a gendered perspective remained. I also ensured females were involved in the planning and analysis of all activities. This was even more important in 2020 when COVID became an external disruptor and both the political and military tensions increased on the island between the sides and bicommunal activities ceased with the closing of all crossing points. The UN mission in Cyprus is more fortunate than perhaps other missions, as it has a higher percentage of females employed across all roles within the force. The operational effectiveness, however, is contingent on how you employ and empower the females across the mission, and not just on numbers alone. I ensured that additional in-country training and mentoring was available for all peacekeepers if issues of operational effectiveness or on some occasions loss of confidence by individuals was identified. This approach remained a priority for me as ensuring our female peacekeepers have a sense of purpose as well as feeling valued and respected leads to a broader retention outcome, creating the conditions that they will seek to be employed in more senior roles in the future. I often wrote directly to member states' senior military representatives, outlining their significant contribution and recommending that they be considered for future UN deployments. Please note, though, that I was nuanced in how I applied my approach, as I didn't want to disenfranchise the males and in turn often make it more difficult for the females. My inclusive and diverse mindset was based on my own career experiences, both negative and positive, and I assessed that most female senior female leaders would have a similar approach and be intuitive with a gendered perspective to peace operations. I'm quite self-reflective by nature, and I assess that there is nothing that I cannot do as a senior female leader. and was often perplexed on how to answer the frequently asked question, what is it like to be the second female force commander? My response was always, I don't know what it's like to be a male force commander. I do know that my mindset is different to my male colleagues, and from my experience, I'd offer that providing a gender lens via data collection and analysis will support all commanders across peacekeeping operations and will formalise what is often intuitive to some. Barriers to females' meaningful participation across operations has been well analysed and published. I applaud the work done by the ELSI initiative, academic think tanks and broader working group by member states. I concur with the findings and note the approaches to address these barriers. It will need to be deliberate, consistent and focused with equal attention to both structural as well as the cultural elements. Additionally, it needs to be a partnership between the UN and member states and accountability held by both. I've spent much of my career being either a problem or an issue, rather than an essential element of operational capability and effectiveness. My assessment is that we equally need to focus on leadership at all levels, both within member states and our military leaders serving under the UN flag. How many of our leaders actually understand what a gendered perspective means and are aware of their conscious and unconscious biases, both cultural and personal, on the roles of female in the creation of an inclusive and diverse workforce? Without this leadership, and in most cases, a he for she approach, we will struggle to neither reduce our barriers to participation nor grow female senior leaders. I applaud the work that has gone into this report and its recommendations, as in Cyprus, we were just commencing using SAGE, CPAS and JMAC analysis to capture the gender data to inform a more gendered perspective on operations. And this will assist in understanding and guiding our leadership teams into the future. Parallel to the launch of this report and the body of work that will result, I would recommend that we address a current gap and provide opportunities to enable and empower our leaders through education, training and mentoring, and even perhaps reverse mentorship to better understand and integrate gender perspectives throughout the mission. Leaders need to believe in the strength of the data and understand how it supports the mission and operational effectiveness. They also need to be aware of their actions and the effect, both positive and negative, of their bias and what it has on our peacekeepers. Finally, on advancing female leaders, it is a collective need by both member states and UN leadership to invest in the recruitment, the development and retention every step of the way. It takes time, experience, education and training to develop senior female leaders. And you'll find that most of us are resilient, determined, with a strong self-belief. We all start our careers with a premise that we can do it all, and it is either poor leadership or structural inequities that creates doubts, bad experiences, and blockages to advancement. And the option of opting out sees many of our best pursue other career options. Thank you.
Well, we're so grateful to General Pierce for those personal reflections, for the wisdom that she conveyed, for the recommendations based on her longtime experience, and most recently as the force commander of the UN peacekeeping mission in Cyprus. So we're very grateful to her and for her service. We had intended next to be able to go to the DRC in Congo to speak with Sophie Stetcher, who was part of the mission there. We learned just as this program was going live that there were tremors in DRC, I think as an aftermath to the volcano, but her mission has been evacuated and she is now not able to join us. So I'm going to turn back to my colleague, Rob Nagel, to give us a quick snapshot of what we understand, what we've learned in this study from the mission in DRC, in MONUSCO.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a real shame that she cannot join us today. One of the critical, a little bit of background on the mission in the DRC on MONUSCO. It is the longest serving multi-dimensional stabilization mission. And You can access the case study that we've produced, available in the chat, the link. And for a long time, it was also the largest mission. However, some withdrawal of troops has started over the past year as some regions of the DRC have stabilized and become more peaceful. The conflict in the northeast regions, and specifically in North and South Kivu, however, continues to be a concern. And in recent weeks and months, there have been a number of anti-MONUSCO protests in Beni and Goma, because the mission has been criticized for a lack of protection of civilians in response to attacks by an armed group called the Allied Democratic Forces, or ADF. In addition, the mission obviously now has the problem of the volcano eruption, which compounds pre-existing difficulties that the mission has faced over the past decades, whether that was Ebola, the COVID pandemic, as we all struggled with last year and continuing this year. And so we had the opportunity to interview a number of both uniformed personnel and civilian peacekeepers and civil society representatives. And some of the key takeaways that I already presented apply to MONUSCO specifically. One being that even though we have engagement teams, mixed engagement teams, we don't know how many of the patrols actually include them. We don't know how much, what kind of information they gather. And so updating the SAGE protocols, the standard operating procedures there, in order to start collecting information and data on that is really important. And also a key aspect that has hampered some of the gender mainstreaming in MONUSCO is that the position of the senior gender advisor has been vacant for a number of years now. And that is critical because gender is not something that you can add on. It is integral and inherent to every aspect of the mission. And one of the reasons why, and I'm hoping Dr. Omer is going to talk about this some more, why CPAS in UNIFIL has been praised by a number of people was because of its integration of a gendered perspective from the very beginning. And so that emphasizes the importance of including gender experts at every step of the mission, and especially at the beginning, making sure the foundation is there on which then uniformed personnel, civilian personnel can build in making peacekeeping operations gender responsive. I'll conclude here because I want to make sure we give Dr. Omer a lot of time to talk about her work and the work of UNIFIL. I'm excited to hear more from you. Everyone can access the case studies online on our website and through the link on the chat. So thank you so much, and back to you.
Thanks, Rob, and thanks for stepping in on the MONUSCO report. As Rob said, we're delighted now to be able to get a report on Lebanon from Dr. Afaf Omer, the Chief Gender Advisory Unit of the Peacekeeping Mission in Lebanon, UNIFIL. Dr. Omer guides the implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security in all its components at the mission, as well as the implementation of the gender-sensitive policies and programs. Earlier, she was the Gender Affairs Officer with the UN mission in Libya. She also has served as an associate professor at the University of North Carolina, Nashville, and chief of the Center for Women at UNESCO with Western Asia, as well as with several other universities, I might add. So Dr. Omer, thank you for being with us. We're looking forward to hearing to your perspectives on the work that you are doing at the Lebanon mission, UN peacekeeping mission. And I'm wondering, have you seen a gender perspective increase operational effectiveness? Because the report shows that there are diverse experiences for women across peacekeeping, and that more women in peacekeeping does not necessarily equate with more effective peacekeeping. So what would you say about this from your own experience? And Rob just mentioned CPAS, that comprehensive planning and performance assessment system that has been is being implemented at UNIFIL. Perhaps you could touch on that as well in giving us your sense of the gender aspects, gender responsiveness in Lebanon at UNIFIL. We can't hear you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Melanie Verveer, and thank you for the team at Georgetown Institute for this report. Good morning, everyone. For all attendees, good afternoon and good evening. Again, I congratulate Georgetown Institute on Women, Peace and Security on this report, as well as the policy brief and case studies. Integrating gender into UNIFIL operation increases operational effectiveness in many ways. These can be grouped into two. First, a gender-responsive peacekeeping ensures that women's needs, priorities are taken into account in planning, conduct of analysis, carrying out of tasks, as well as in reporting. The second group is related to the presence of uniformed peacekeepers positively affect operational effectiveness when performing practical tasks that involve other women, like body searches or caring for victims of sexual violence, getting information from them. Also, women peacekeepers are more effective at gaining local population trust as they are perceived as less threatening than men peacekeepers. Women peacekeepers improve the credibility of the peacekeeping force. Their presence reduces instances of sexual and exploitative violence from men in the peacekeeping force. Women in peacekeeping contingents constitute role models and contribute to the empowerment of local women and girls. And women's aptitude to communicate with local women and girls enables the collection of more nuanced and more complete human intelligence. I could mention several anecdotes where women in the community talk to us directly about this. In particular, I can mention that the presence of women peacekeepers is looked at as role models, and in 2014 we have conducted a study on the four pillars of 1325, and we have asked questions of women in the community, and one of the things that they mentioned is that for them the presence of uniformed peacekeepers makes them think that they themselves can participate in the police force as well as the armed forces. And sure enough, once LAF, Lebanese Armed Forces, opens the doors for women to be recruited, a large number of women were eligible and were taken both into the directly into the army, but many of them into the military college. However, the presence of female peacekeepers has to be effective in itself. And that means women peacekeepers upon deployment would have to be trained on gender mainstreaming, on the cultural specificity of the region, so they can integrate better and communicate better with the community, also on conflict-related sexual violence. This training is essential. We also need to be aware that capitalizing on the specific skills of women reinforce gender roles. It also promotes essentialist view of women and places unfair expectations on deployed women. This, along with what was already mentioned, that sometimes this creates some form of resentment from their male colleagues that may make their job harder. We also have to be aware that the militarization of the women, peace and security agenda could also be a real danger. Crucial goals of the women, peace and security agenda, most importantly, gender equality and the pursuit of peace, risk being co-opted by military imperative in service of security. This is especially so in a global pandemic context as the one we are experiencing, where pressing human security and health issues have put gender equality on the back burner. How to measure an important problem is also measuring the effectiveness of peacekeeping operations itself. Because we now talk about how the presence of uniformed women peacekeepers improves the effectiveness. Measuring the effectiveness of peacekeeping itself is problematic. For this, we have, as Nigel has mentioned, there is SAGE, the Situation and Analysis Geospatial Enterprise. There is CPAS, which is a comprehensive planning and performance analysis system. So we added planning, not instead of just comprehensive performance analysis system, planning is added. So from the get-go, we have in mind that we need the impact of peacekeeping. And these and the Women, Peace and Security Indicators. The Women, Peace and Security Indicators, as well as the other two, are important steps to measure the impact of peacekeeping efforts. At UNIFIL, CPAS provides an opportunity for mission leadership to apply a gender lens to its data collection and analysis across sectors and levels. The Women, Peace and Security Indicators are also partially intended to inform CPAS. At UNIFIL, the mission leadership, the Principal Coordinator's Office that also contains a planning officer, and the Gender Advisory Unit made a concerted effort to integrate a gender lens when establishing CPAS and as we review it annually. UNIFIL, in relation to gender mainstreaming in UNIFIL, UNIFIL has institutionalized gender mainstreaming mechanisms. These are described in UNIFIL Gender Mainstreaming Strategy that covers 2019 to 2023. At the leadership of this, at the strategic level, is UNIFIL High-Level Integrated Gender Task Force. This task force is chaired by the head of mission, force commander, and the Gender Advisory Unit act as a secretary for this task force. This task force comprises military and civilian leadership, such as the directors and chiefs of civilian sections, as well as sector commanders. And the Integrated Gender Task Force works on the strategic level to guide and support one civilian gender task force and 3 military gender task forces, one in each sector. These 4 gender task forces work at the operational and tactical level, while they are supported with the integrated Gender Task Force at the strategic. At UNIFIL, an important tool to ensure the integration of gender and the Women, Peace and Security agenda is the annual UNIFIL Women, Peace and Security Action Plan, with contributions from all UNIFIL civilian and military components. The comprehensive plan is reviewed by the mission leadership and monitored and evaluated throughout the cycle. At the end of the cycle, best practices and lessons learned are collected and evaluated for the preparation of the next year plan. UNIFIL has also established in its area of operation the gender working groups. These are umbrella of the women civil society organization in each sector. This is a total of 128 women civil society organizations. And you can imagine if we didn't have this, how hard it is to work with 128 society or organizations working in the area of gender. Lebanon has a very prolific civil society organizations, and these organizations really vary in size and in the type of work that they pursue. And so having this umbrella assists us in getting through to the community organizations. And these organizations are co-chaired with the gender advisor as well as an elected member of civil society organization. So another important aspect of UNIFIL is training on gender mainstreaming, the WPS mandates, and conflict-related sexual violence, and this is ongoing with each rotation. Today, UNIFIL is an operation comprising over 10,000 uniformed personnel and over 800 civilian staff. Only around under 7% of our uniform personnel are women, while 31% of our civilian staff are women. And we continue to work to improve balance in those numbers. UNIFIL has a gender parity strategy modeled after the Secretary General strategy for gender parity. And this gender parity strategy looks at numbers, but also at the importance of attitudinal and cultural shift to accommodate for the increase in the number of women. It's also put a lot of emphasis on building an environment that is enabling for women. And so in this regard, also UNIFIL Head of Mission and Force Commander continuously lobby with DPO headquarters as well as with troop contributing countries to increase the number of women, and we report to the Office of Military Affairs continuously on uniform gender parity strategy. To make up for the low percentage of women in the military, UNIFIL has established the Female Analysis Assessment and Support Team. Short is FAST. This is composed with each rotation to meet the challenge of low percentages of uniformed women. This team supports outreach activities where women are necessary. We also issue pocket guidelines to all military personnel with short, direct, standardized messages and recommendations on gender in the different language of the battalions. There is also UNIFIL Gender Master Messages that has been approved by the head of mission and force commander and posted on the Cosmos to ensure at all times access to UNIFIL's directions, gender and on the culture in the area of operation. This is supported throughout the year and at different occasions with outreach messages that are distributed to the military personnel. The military personnel is also made aware of the referral pathways whenever they are faced with issues related to sex and gender-based violence. I would stop here for this question and look for you if you have another question, Your Excellency.
Well, we're going to thank you so much for that. We're going to give our audience an opportunity to ask questions, but I just wanted to say that it was so useful to hear the many ways in which you are trying to adopt a greater gender responsive structure within the structures and operations of UNIFIL. And I'm sure that there are many who are listening to you who are wondering how they can do as good a job as you have indicated in the successes you've had. But from the working groups that involve the local organizations to the training programs with the specifics that you delineated, the gender parity strategy and the advocacy that goes with that, the analysis and support efforts, it's obviously a very comprehensive approach that you're adopting to achieve overall better results. So let's now go to our audience. I'm going to call on Allie Smith, who's been looking at the questions that have been coming in, and maybe we can tackle some of those right now.
Sure. Two here on increasing the number of women in peacekeeping. The first is from Lise Howard at Georgetown University. How can peacekeeping missions increase the supply of female troops from troop contributing countries when most national militaries have so few women in their ranks? And relatedly, from Rena Alanin with Inclusive Growth and Innovation at UNDP, how do we find practical ways to encourage troop contributing countries to increase the number of women military peacekeepers? What mechanisms and incentives can be used, and what role should the UN play?
Two questions addressing the sometime challenges with troop contributing countries, particularly with respect to greater female participation in their ranks. This is one of those barriers, and maybe we can hear from you, Dr. Omar, on that, and from Dr. Nagel as well.
This is a very challenging situation because not only that the troop contributing countries themselves have lower percentage of women, also sometimes we run into the fact that some countries regard peacekeeping as combat operation. And in many countries, women are not in combat operations. And so sometimes, along with the difficulty in the numbers themselves, there is this issue whether peacekeeping is in combat. Another issue that is often not mentioned, but is there, is the role of women as mothers and taking care of their families, because the ages in which women would participate in peacekeeping is also the reproductive ages for women, where they are the caretakers of the children. And so often this is a major reason for why we don't get enough women. Another issue is that among the uniformed women there are more at the level of officers. So we have officers rather than soldiers. And this is good because that means they are in decision making and leadership position. But also within this, there is a tendency that we find women more in the medical section or maybe engineering, where there are more women than in the other section. So this is to some extent skew what is going on. That's why having the FAST, which is a female analysis and support center, team is important. This is different actually from the female engagement teams. The female engagement teams tend to do more of an intelligence work and focus on the community. The FAST goes throughout all the operations that I mentioned earlier, where the presence of women is needed, whether it's at the gates, in mixed patrols, and I am really happy that the Undersecretary mentioned the UNIFIL platoon, and also in other, activities where their presence is needed, and that is all outreach activities. Discussing outreach, I am just going to go a little bit outside for something that I didn't mention, because it was, we talked, especially Dr. Nigel talked about the importance of reporting. UNIFIL have recently engaged, it's the outreach in order to engender its reporting. So now the tracking community engagement system in UNIFIL, it has been engendered in the sense that when activities are reported, they are reported with gender lens. So we know whether from UNIFIL personnel, women have participated, also in the community that we are serving, the level of engagement of women at all levels. So this became an important tool. It's a database called Tracking Engagement in the Community. And now it's engendered in UNIFIL. So whenever an activity is recorded into the data system, it's always with gender lens, it's always, we disaggregate the data into male and female.
Director General Coots, did you want to add something to this? Because this is really a very fundamental question about the culture of the troop contributing countries and trying to reach outcomes for greater female participation, among other things.
Yes, thank you. It's actually the point of the ELSI initiative is figuring out how to get more women in uniformed roles, meaningful uniformed roles in UN peace operations, but it also addresses the whole pipeline question. You can't get more women into UN peace operations unless you have more women serving at home in the military and in police. So the ELSI initiative is designed to help police and troop contributing nations address their own barriers for recruitment, retention, promotion, and deployment into UN operations. And there's some really great tools out there now that have been developed through the ELSI initiative. For example, through DCAF, we have worked to develop a publicly available gender barrier assessment methodology called Measuring Opportunities for Women in Peace Operations, which allows both military and police institutions to undertake a very rigorous assessment of where are the barriers, the institutional, the cultural barriers that prevent women from entering and from thriving in their institutions and getting to the point where that nation can also deploy to the UN operations. So to get more women at the end, you have to fix the pipeline from the beginning. And countries can apply to the ELSI Initiative Fund, which is administered by UN Women, in order to undertake such a barrier assessment where they can do it on themselves. They can also apply for flexible funding to address those barriers that have been identified through that assessment. And finally, there's also a really interesting incentivization mechanism in the ELSI fund, which is to provide a monetary premium to those troop and police contributing nations who are able to field gender-strong units. Now, a gender-strong unit is one in which women have meaningful roles in leadership and across the spectrum of activities, and where the entire unit is also trained in gender sensitivity issues. So it's not just the women, but also the men. So there's lots of really exciting opportunities that can be accessed through the ELSI initiative, and we're looking forward to more and more countries taking it up. The second programming round has just been launched, so please go check out the tools and the tips which are available on the UN Women website.
Those are very good points, and thank you for them. And I think particularly your point that it really begins at home in those troop contributing nations and their own armed forces and police and the opportunities for women. I remember sitting with women who were, and I won't say which countries, were about to go on peacekeeping missions, excited as they were. But they talked about how difficult it was within the work that they were participating in the armed forces or in policing, and how few of them there were, but more about how tough it was as well. So I think these resources are incredibly important. Rob, did you want to add anything before we move on to more questions?
No, I think we should probably move on to more questions. Thank you.
Okay. Allie?
Sure. This one's for you, Rob. A attendee asking, could you please elaborate on the kinds of effects observed that contributed to the conclusion of an improvement in community engagement based on the 3 country case studies analyzed? Was there a difference in the types of roles and activities female troops and police engaged in versus males? And then I'll add in a second one here that we can close. We've mentioned the need to engage male support. Do the panelists have specific recommendations on how to do this and how to create male allies across the ranks? How do we improve men's receptivity to gender initiatives?
So let's start with Rob on the 3 case studies and the similarities or differences on this point. And then we'll close with everyone else on male allies, male support in moving forward.
Thank you. Yes, so the evidence that we gathered from all 3 missions was both based on interviews with mission personnel, men and women, and civil society representatives. And what we heard consistently, repeatedly, was that as soon as women are part of patrols, local women are more likely to come and speak to the patrol and share information. And specifically, one UNIFIL commander mentioned that he's aware of that, and whenever he knows this patrol will pass through a village or a town where he's expecting local community engagement, he's making sure to have women as part of the patrol, because he knows based on his experience that facilitates the exchange of information and enhances situational awareness. One key obstacle that, especially in MONUSCO in the DRC, has become apparent throughout the research was shared by a community liaison assistant, and that actually 85% of community liaison assistants that often serve as translators are men. So even if we have women as part of the patrols, you might have a man as an interlocutor, as a translator, which can sort of impede the positive impact that women can have, because if the local women still have to talk to a man to translate the information to women, they might still be hesitant. So one of the things that we also recommend and highlight is that when working with local civilian staff members, community liaison assistants, it's important that we also pay attention to the gender balance there, that we have enough women as translators, enough women as community liaison assistants to really get to that. I know we're almost at the end, so I'll stop there and pass it on to our panelists for the second question.
So quickly, Dr. Omar, in terms of male support, male allies in the work that you and your colleagues are doing at UNIFIL, what experience do you have?
It's really amazing how much support we are receiving from our male colleagues, as well as from leadership in the military. UNIFIL tends to be heavily male at the top. However, because of the support that we are receiving, this becomes secondary. And also we emphasize more gender integration into the work. So awareness of gender integration and gender mainstreaming makes up for what is lacking in numbers. In relation to our engagement with the community, there is an anecdote that I mentioned that elaborate on Dr. Nigel's point, is that our Sector West commander, who's currently our actually head of mission and force commander, Major General Paul, when he goes into the community, he will make sure that he have female soldiers with him in meeting with the different key leader engagement. And when he met with the mayor saw that there are women in the group, and he said, he apologized for not having women in his council. He invited women to come sit in the council, and sure enough, the next municipal election, several women were elected to the council. So this kind of impact cannot be underestimated for how the male leadership could improve gender within the mission, but also its impact on the community.
Yes, can't de-underestimate it. And I think that modeling example is a good one. Director General Coutts.
Thank you. Yes, male allies are absolutely essential. This is a big transformation of societies that we're looking for. We're not going to get there with just half of the population playing. The burden can't be on women. It is a shared responsibility to make for more effective peace operations. And the more that everyone is engaged, the faster we're going to get there. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And it's appropriate, I think, that you have the last word, since much of this has been instigated by the great ELSI initiative and Canada's commitment, which is enabling, I think, everyone involved to do a better job on something that's so important. And also what you said, Director General Coutts, about everyone's responsibility. It's where Undersecretary Lacroix started, and I think it's a very good point for us to end on. We've got it a little over, but I think it was well worth hearing from anybody. I want to thank all of our participants, certainly the Undersecretary General for Peace Operations, for taking the time to be with us. To you, Director General Coutts, again, and to all of your colleagues involved in the ELSI initiative and for the work that continues on that. To Dr. Omar for your experiential sharing of your work with UNIFIL, for Major General Cheryl Pierce and her personal experience as a force commander, and of course to our own colleague, Dr. Nagel, for all the hard work that went into the study. So thank you to each and every one of you. The work goes on, ever onward.